All right, well, welcome everyone to Boot Camp Week 3. You're either the folks who have stuck it out this long or have just jumped on. We have a couple people who joined us, who are joining us sort of midstream. I'm just going to give us a quick overview of what we're going to do today, but I'm going to do hopefully not that much talking. Basically, we're going to try to spend more time this week doing some dealing with issues that you might be having while you're working with your forms, and that will take two forms that will be so many uses of the word form, huh? That will take two different incarnations. One will be us doing breakout rooms as we did last week, hopefully for longer, and the other will be before we go into breakout rooms. We'll have everyone sort of write something to the teams in the chat to say sort of what is their frustration or pain point that they're dealing with right now. And that'll allow everyone an opportunity to sort of say something. We'll mine those, and then we'll maybe do one or two little things here as a full group before breaking to breakout rooms to address those very common issues that everyone is facing. But before all of that, Bryce is going to help lead us in some GitHub stuff, which we started with, previewed at the end of last week, which is that we asked people to get a GitHub account. So we want to make sure that you have that, that you have your playground open in another window, squinch us off to the side maybe, or if you're very lucky and you have multiple screens, balance that as you would like. And that's pretty much that. So we'll do, I think, about 30 minutes or so on the GitHub sort of stuff. We'll do a little break that we'll give you some more instructions about sort of typing some out, some pain points. We'll come back, we'll deal with those, and then we'll go into breakout rooms, and then we'll come back again together like we did last week and do a report back. But that's just the general bit there. So again, I'm going to start with hopefully everyone now has an account on Teams. And so that's a place where we can share things and whatnot. I imagine, do what we continually have been doing, which is allow parallel posting there and in the Zoom. The benefit of doing it in Teams, of course, is that maintains a record for us and for everyone. All right, that being said, does anyone want to, Quentin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that before we jumped in, or no?
Nope, I think it's a great summary. I think we could preview next week for folks, although we'll do that at the end as well. So next week, we're going to do a little bit more advanced doc assemble stuff. I know a few of you are thinking about automating fee waiver forms, or affidavits of indigency is what we call them here in Massachusetts. So we're going to be working with some advanced stuff around dealing with collecting income information. So that'll be an exciting thing next week.
And then we'll go to Bryce. You will notice, if you go back to your Trello board and to your card, you will notice that the GitHub stuff, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is codified there as well in the to-do list. And this is a primary way that we use to be able to collaborate on shared bits of code. So take it away, Bryce.
Cool, yeah, thanks, David. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so we have sort of something a little bit interesting to look at. So I was going to start off with just a quick sort of explanation of what GitHub is and sort of like why we use it. I think we touched on it a little bit last time, but just sort of as a re-clarifier. So GitHub is sort of, it's a technology based on Git, and that we get, or Git, which is G-I-T and not G-E-T. And we get a few benefits. We get a few benefits from working on GitHub. The first one is sort of is what we get from Git is that you can see the entire history of what you've worked on and sort of like how it's progressed. And so if you ever change something and you want to come back, you can go back and see what your form looked like at a specific point in time. So for example, I'm on one of our forms. Specifically, it's sort of like it's a cover sheet for civil cases in the Massachusetts Appeals Court that I've been working on. And this is sort of like, we won't get super in depth to what all of these different parts mean on GitHub yet. But sort of if you feel free to play around and find sort of figure some things out. GitHub has a lot of good documentation out there on how to use it. But essentially, if you can go into what are called commits, which are sort of like you can think of it as like each time you click save, you'll have your entire form saved at that point. and you can always go back to a specific point. So right now, we can look at like the last change that I made, which was some sort of changing how we were displaying the sort of the PDF attachment that we will send off to the court. But we can go back to sort of the very first commit that I made back in December, which was adding a lot of sort of just the base documents and some of the sort of like the very first version of the questions. And so that's sort of one thing that we get is that you can always go, as long as you commit a change, you can always go back and find it and sort of reuse that change. So you should, if you're using Git right or GitHub right, then you shouldn't have to worry about experimenting, trying some new things, maybe some different flows in your interview. If they don't quite work or you don't like, they're just not as, you don't like them as much as your old ones, you can always go back and find the exact text of what you had your old one as. And the second part of GitHub, which is sort of what we'll probably focus a bit more on, is the collaborative part. So the fact that normally, if you're just working in the playground, you would just get you'll only be able to sort of like you'll be the one person able to work on that bit of code really. But if we start using GitHub, you can have multiple people come in and sort of make some changes to like one person can commit or can make a change, and then another person can sort of also make some additional changes on top of that. And GitHub will smartly try and combine those changes when it can. If it can't, it'll sometimes let you know, other times not. For example, you can see that Mia, one of another students in the lab, has also made some changes to this same repository. And so, yeah, so that's sort of just a basic idea of what GitHub is and like why we're sort of using it. And I think at this point, I was going to let Joelle take over for a little bit, and she was going to she's essentially going to show you how to start using GitHub with DocAssemble. So I will stop sharing, and Joelle, you should have permission to share.
Hi guys. Okay. So I was gonna start off by showing you guys how to integrate your GitHub to the playground, so that when you make changes, you can just commit them, and it's very easy to keep track that way. So you would start on your GitHub page. You would go to your profile. Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe while
Setting.
you're, yeah, maybe while you're getting that ready, we'll just make sure if you haven't created a GitHub account, remember it was just that 30-second thing that we did at the end of last week. So go ahead and make sure to do that so you can follow along. Sorry, Joel, continue.
No worries. Why? I'm starting at the wrong place. All right, so in your playground, so definitely have your GitHub open, and then in your playground, you would go down here to the drop-down menu next to your email, and you would hit profile. Then you'd hit other settings and go to GitHub integration. So I removed this so that I can show you guys in class, and I made sure that it worked. But you go ahead and you hit configure, and then it grants apps.suffolk.lab access to your files. So you authorize that and just give it a minute.
And specifically in this case, it says Suffolk Lit Lab, but what it really means is Suffolk Lit Lab is the name of our DocAssemble server. And so when if you go on and make your own DocAssemble server, it'll say the name of that server. Sorry.
Perfect. And then you get a little email that says just that something was added to your GitHub. And so now when you go into the playground, so we are going to use this as an example. So the generic jurisdiction. Okay, so we are going to start by making a new package. And in the GitHub, we're going to take this URL and copy paste it. So this is just the page of the repo that we're going to be using on GitHub, and we're going to pull it into our playground. So we just go ahead and hit pull right here, and we paste that URL in. We're pasting it to the main branch because I believe this one only has one branch, but if it had other branches, you could decide right here which one you would want to pull it to.
And to clarify for folks, this is if there's an existing repo. Joelle will cover in a moment how you would create the repo.
Yep.
Or someone will.
Yeah. We'll get to creating specifically what we're probably. Yeah, sorry, I probably should have clarified a bit. Like this workflow we're going through is starting from an existing repo and making another one in addition to it. I was gonna say this is probably also a good point to sort of check in and make sure everyone is not having too much trouble following along. If anyone can feel free to speak up if you have like running into errors or anything.
You can drop things in chat as well. I am not seeing a bunch of questions thrown up in chat though. So.
Cool. Sorry. Feel free to keep
Okay.
This might look familiar too. This is like another way to get a package into your playground. We used the upload button last couple weeks, and this time we're using pull instead.
And then these files are, so basically this repo was made from the package you get after putting something through the Weaver. And these are the YAML files right here, the interview files. And so right here is where I'll show you guys when we change it in the playground, but this is how you would make a change. You would hit commit, you would hit GitHub, and you would write like a little message, let's say like fixed date error, for example. And then you would hit commit, and then that would pop up on your GitHub and show that you had done this change. To make a new repo, you could also hit add right here. And this would make a new package in the same like playground project. So then we could choose a name, let's say generic jurisdiction part 2. I actually think you can't do spaces. So hold on a second. And then you would commit that change. Oh.
I believe it was sorry. Yeah, you'll need a save first, I think.
And then commit. Thank you, Bryce. Second repo. You commit that. And just takes a minute. But yeah, essentially, that's how you would make a second repo in the same project and how you pull it from your GitHub. So here it says push commit to GitHub. So if I was to go on GitHub, it should show that change. Maybe it still needs time to refresh, but.
Sorry, so actually, if you go back to the package, you scroll up the way you can reach the GitHub, the GitHub repository directly from the playground is if you go back to the bottom where you click commit, it'll now say published on GitHub, and that link is the new repo.
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah.
okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and so for everyone following along, and that will be a new repository on your own user, with whatever title you gave it. Yeah.
You could have just as easily made edits in your playground, taken those edits, and then pushed them to the existing repository. So it's just a common place to store everything. Mm-hmm. Or a different place to store everything, depending if you want to put it in a different place.
And we'll just add in, so you won't be able to make a change on the generic jurisdiction repository unless you're part of the Suffolk Lit Lab organization. it won't stop you from making a commit. What it will do is it will make a new repository with the same name in your own username, associated with your username rather than Suffolk Lab.
And then if you, this might not be the best one to use just to make edits on, but like if I was in this package and I made edits to push it to a GitHub just to commit the edit right here, you would go to packages and then scroll down and hit GitHub and it would commit that change.
And right now, since it's the new package that Joelle's created, this would be changing that new package there. Again, you're not gonna, if you were following along, you're not gonna mess up our existing package. And if you did somehow, if you were part of the team somehow and made a change, we could disentangle it. I see Quentin unmuted.
Oh, well, John, I just wanted to know if you show us how do we choose what files are going to be part of this new package that we made? I thought that might be something people want to see.
I believe right here. So when you initially when you add and add a new package, these interview files, they would usually be highlighted for the ones that you would be using. So I think when I made this one, these were the ones that were highlighted and these as well. I'm not sure what static files is, but interview files right here is the ones you would select and then save.
Yeah, and the static files would be things like pictures or whatnot that might have been used that you were referencing. And there are also the template files, which would be things like the PDFs or the docx that you could use. And as Michelle is noting in the chat, you can select multiple ones by hitting either Command or Control and click so that you can get multiple files there. So it's basically, this is what you want. This is the package you're making. And this, whatever you select here is what will get pushed to GitHub.
It might be worth trying live just for people to see. So right now, if we go back to your GitHub repository and go down to, I think you have it in the rightmost tab. And this is like a good place to just see what's the structure of a docassemble repository or package. So you see like they all start out with this folder named docassemble, so we can click through that. Then it's going to have the name of our package, the specific part of it. And then inside there, there's a data folder. And you see there are a couple of different folders here. Those map onto the folders that we saw in our playground. So we're going to look at, there's no questions folder here because no questions were pushed up. And if you see it, look in these other folders here, we have sources, static, and templates. Those are going to be, just have one little file in them. That's kind of a placeholder file too. So we could try clicking on one of those to see what it looks like. So we just have this little README file. So when we pushed up this one, it was an empty package. I do see a couple of questions in the chat. So one is from Lila, who's asking, is GitHub a source control application? Yeah, it is. So version control, source control, it's a way to store your work and to see the changes and see when changes get made. And then Warda has a question about the name of her package. Big thing to know is you just use like letters and numbers and no spaces, and you should be good with the name of your package.
I think I'm missing something because I put testing 1, 2, 3, and then it still said invalid, and I used what Joelle did, and I also got invalid, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, we could take a look at it if that's okay with everybody else. You might not be the only person with that, if you don't mind sharing your screen, or at least just that one browser window.
Trying to figure out which screen it is. Okay, I think it's that. All right. I think I missed something. I was there and then I wasn't, and I feel like I clicked poll and then yeah, I don't know.
Well, this looks right, except the one thing I think you missed is just clicking the add button to make a new package. I don't know if that's related to the error or not. Because the name itself looks fine. Let's try clicking add, because we do want to make a new package now, I think.
I want to leave the site.
Yeah, you can click leave. It's just telling you that you made a change that didn't save. So here, try putting testing 1, 2, 3 and see if it lets you save the package now. There
Okay.
you go.
Makes
And
sense.
now that you've saved it, you should be able to push it to GitHub.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
The key thing is with one thing is if you haven't selected any files, then that's going to sort of be, you only will push up to your package what you've selected in the files, so the YAML files and the et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
I think there's a question in the chat about backing up the GitHub repo from Stephen in the Zoom chat. Is it possible to automatically back up the GitHub repos to a local media, or do you assume that Microsoft backs up the self-created data properly?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of, and I think Bryce has answered it a little bit in the chat. So, but it's good to put it on this recording. Git is fully decentralized. So GitHub is one place where you can store a copy of your Git data. One copy ends up on the docassemble server. But if you want to make your own copies, you can. And I think Bryce is right. It's like a little bit more advanced topic. But there should be some pretty good explanations of how to use Git. And there's a command line version, but there's also a desktop version. So if you wanted to download Git desktop, you could visually make a copy on your machine whenever you wanted to and keep that in sync with what's on the GitHub server. Thanks, Joel, for being so patient while we did the sidetrack. I think it's good to check in on some of these things. So, thanks.
Yeah, I know we wanted to discuss changing the logo, but Bryce, I'm definitely gonna have you handle that.
That's totally fine. I can sort of take back over since we've sort of got a little bit of GitHub stuff. Yeah, so so we'll probably revisit some more GitHub stuff, or maybe would it make sense to revisit GitHub stuff at now, or sort of in a little at least just sort of combining all the GitHub stuff at once. That actually might make a little bit of sense. And so I was following along, and the one thing I had not yet done was simply make the GitHub account, or sorry, make the new GitHub repo in the same way y'all had. So we wait for a few more seconds. But so there are a few more things that you'll often do in GitHub. GitHub repository cannot be found after creating it. Live errors. Ooh, okay, this is a lot. And I'm not sure what's going on there. But let's see if we can get back to the packages page.
The joy of live demos.
Joy of live demos. So it looks like it was correct. Sometimes I think there just might be issues where the GitHub packages, if you're making a new GitHub repository, for specific, okay, so that was the existing GitHub repository. Yes, so yeah, sometimes it's still properly created on my user. Sorry, doesn't look like much was actually committed, but let's see if we can solve that with just one more commit. Sometimes small things like that will just happen where you have, if GitHub's too busy creating the repository and docassemble sort of was a little impatient in trying to make commits, then some information might not be there, but we can take another look and it's all good now. Live debugging. But so one of the specific things we were going to do was create using this sort of one of the useful things in this package that was the reason we're sort of having y'all follow along creating it is because this is sort of the base, or yeah, this is sort of the base package we have that has some easy information or easy setup for your interviews. And specifically, this sort of helps you set up an initial, sort of an easy initial screen like this in front of all of your interviews. And specifically, that happens because if we go back to the actual code or the actual interview that's being running, we have one mandatory block, which means it's going to be run. And then we're simply calling this thing called AL intro or AL intro screen, which is defined. And I have been kicked off of the Suffolk Lit Lab for some reason, so I have to log back in. But essentially, that AL intro screen defines and sort of helps this intro screen run. And so we're gonna just easily or sort of quickly go through. Apologies, I am trying to also get my information so I can log back in correctly. But we're gonna go through some easy things you can change, such as this right here, which is just a logo, just the word logo, but we can change that. We're gonna change that with an easy picture. And we can also change some sort of steps or information about information on this screen, which you will then be able to use in your own interviews. So let me log back in really quick. There we go. And now we're back. So specifically on this custom organization screen, the logo is being set in, there's this block that starts with metadata. And then there's a sort of, there's an attribute of metadata, which is logo. And in this logo, there's, this is sort of HTML. If any of y'all are familiar with web programming, this is just some simple HTML that sets an image. And it tells you where you got your image from. In this case, we're getting this image from, sort of like what Quentin and David alerted to earlier, we're getting this image from a folder that's in this repository. And so if we can actually see it, we can go to folders, static files, and there is a icon, is that icon Munster, I think? But yeah, and so essentially there's this icon Munster script that we can get and use. However, in order for this to work, the package has to be sort of installed on the Docassemble server, which we want you all to be able to follow along, and installing 30 different packages on the Docassemble server at the same time isn't sort of going to be super smooth. Since generally you want to install them not a ton all at the same time. And so instead of referring to the referring to an image that's on the server, we can also just find any image that's on the internet. So specifically, I made.
And Bryce, could you? I think there's a question about where this file came from exactly. So this is. Could you just back up? Like, how would they see this custom organizations YAML? How did that get into their playground? Is that from having run it through the Weaver, or is it something else?
No. Okay. Yeah. So this is something else. So essentially one of the things that we will do in the Weaver is we'll make your one of the things that we'll do in the Weaver is we have sort of a set of library or a set of like Docassemble packages, which you can sort of just think of as like sort of question libraries that allow you to sort of like a lot of the sort of automatic questions that we'll make, they get pulled from that questions library. And this is one of those. I don't think it's exactly one of the things that we're pulling from when we grab through the Weaver, but this is essentially the same idea. And so I'm thinking, what's the...
Bryce, you might have in your playground, you might have the one from last week, so we can just see what we're doing. So basically, this custom organization.yaml file is one you could use instead of the one that points to Massachusetts. That's basically what we're going to replace this with.
Yeah, so actually, I don't know if I have...
Oh, you might have any of the ones that you've worked on before. So the motion to stay general would probably too, if it's new enough. Okay, yeah.
So
So here, see on this line, there's a line there that says MA virtual court. That's you'll have something that says mass access instead for you. But
Yeah,
basically, we're replacing that file that has all the Massachusetts branding with what's in this package. And we tried to set it up so you could just easily see what do I need to change to make it say Louisiana, Illinois, Saxony, whatever, whatever place you want to have branding for. We tried to put it all in this package so you can change it all at once.
And so this YAML would have been, you would have gotten it from pulling it down from our repo and into your playground. And then in this file here, you would reference it. So I just wanted to make sure that step was clear for folks who were wondering where this file came from.
There's a good example.
So yeah, this is a better example. If you'll have exactly assembly line AL package.
So let's try running it, and just people can see like what it changes. Try running this one as is now.
Yes, yeah. So this is a
Or
little bit
you have a copy of it. Perfect.
Yeah,
All
so
right,
this is a little bit different of like a standalone free factor, but the idea is the same. Normally, you would just run that same file.
And you see it has the Massachusetts logo, and then it says Mass Access Project. So if Bryce changes that line in his playground where it imported Mass Access Project, which I guess this one's in 2 separate files, but so that should still be fine. A little bit more complicated for you to see.
Yeah.
I just installed the package on the server. I forgot I hadn't only done it on the test server. So now you'll be able to see the logo and it will work.
Okay, cool.
I just hadn't done that part. So yeah, so Bryce will change that line that says mass access to AL generic jurisdiction. With everyone doing it at once, things can still be a little slow, even though we upgraded it. So mass access will change to AL generic jurisdiction.
And it's just
colon. It will be a colon, and then it will say like I think custom. Yeah, the exact document.
I believe it's custom organization.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like,
that is right. I'm just looking at it now. It's an underscore. Just like that.
Okay, cool.
So now if Bryce saves and runs that file, one that actually can run on its own.
Yes.
You have everything in one file, so you don't have this complication. You'll see the logo. Now we'll actually display. So it has this little icon of someone signing a piece of form. And instead of saying court forms online, it just says file legal forms online. So that's all been all that branding was in the mass access file. You point it to a new server, a new package rather, and it's going to show the new branding. Yeah, I was
going to say I couldn't.
The logo's a little weird. I just was trying to find a logo that worked that we could get without having to have a license on it, and so it's a royalty-free one.
Yeah.
It's a little weird with the black background, but like, let's say you want to change anything about your the way that this looked. You could change everything about the appearance of the website by making a package like this, which had your branding. It would be kept on its own and wouldn't interfere with the rest of the code that we have. So like the background color of that navigation bar, for example, the size and the look of the different buttons, the rounded corners, you want to make those all squared off. That would all be changed by working in a package like this one.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, thanks for that, Quinn and David, for sort of like helping to get a little bit of background. Yeah, so if we go back, so this is sort of example of just like how it's going to look in your own interviews and how it ends up being used. But yeah, so let's say we wanted to change, like to actually change this image. So again, sort of right, if you go to the custom organization demo, and you save and run, this should sort of will be the same thing. Yep, file legal forms online, and it has our little logo. But if so we can sort of change that logo by sort of, in this case, we're going to grab just any image online and replace it with the one that's sort of in the package. So let's say I have been using the Genovia crest from the fictional land of Genovia. And So if you just sort of take, sorry, I went through that quick. So just find any image online. I sort of like do a Google or just an image search. And if you go to the actual page of the image, it'll sort of end with .jpeg or .png usually. And you copy this URL, and then you go back and you put it specifically between the two quote marks after source equals. And that's just saying this is where the image is. And if we go back and save, and then we can go to custom organization demo and run really quick to just see if that logo changed. And sure enough, we now have our Genovia crest instead of the other logo. And we can also sort of continue to do sort of just other quick modifications to our intro screen like this. Let's say instead of preview, we just say like look over instead, just like some simple sort of copy editing changes. We can get again save and go back to the demo, save and run, close some of these old tabs. And now we can see it says look over the completed form. And so, yeah, so those are sort of just some easy ways to play around with what the intro screen would, or what our intro screen would look at. And so taking a pause on that, I don't know if I have not been monitoring chat. If there are any other questions that I have not addressed.
I'm not seeing any other in both places, but yeah. So was everyone able to find after you had pulled the package? Were you able then to find the custom organizations YAML file in your playground and then make those edits? That's the point I want to make sure that people got. Like if you hadn't have pulled down that package, you wouldn't have found this file to be able to play with. I just want to make sure there was no questions there. And basically the idea is it's now, you can bring it in and then you can overwrite the default stuff that we had, which was there with your own stuff. And of course we can deal with that more maybe we'll deal with that more in the breakout rooms if there are questions.
Mm-hmm. And so if there aren't too many questions, we can always, if they are still sort of being typed out and percolating, we can come back. But there are a few more sort of like just sort of GitHub uses that I was going to go over. So let's say in this case, we're editing and making a few changes to our intro screen. But this also applies if you wanted to say you're in a normal interview and you're just making changes and a few other things in GitHub as well. Let's go ahead and actually do what we've been mentioning, or we mentioned at the beginning of the fact that GitHub can save our changes every single time. So we always have a copy of them. Sorry, was not explaining what I was doing. So if we're back at our playground. Again, if you go to folders and packages, which is sort of where you'll handle a lot of this saving. So if you go scroll all the way to the bottom, and if you've linked to GitHub, you'll come across this part. And this time, instead of just pushing to main, we're going to make a new branch. So let's say this time we made a bunch of changes. We updated our logo and sort of did some small copy edit language changes. But we're not sure if we want, if those are the final changes we want. We want to sort of see if other people like those changes as well. So what we'll do is we'll make a new branch, which was here. We selected new branch instead. And in the name of the new branch, again, I think you have to use letters, underscores, and I think you can use dashes, but you can't use spaces. But we sort of can give a description, a short description. So logo and language change or lang changes. Just to say we made, like, this is where we're making some logo and lang changes, and specifically in our commit message, we can be a little more specific. And so we can commit and wait for the actual operation to finish. It'll take a little bit, but when it does, you'll see this Also, there's generally a lot of information in this screen, but as long as it's blue and it does say push commit to GitHub at the top, then you're okay. And so now we see we're actually, it says the current branch is logo and lang changes, which is good. It's what we have changed it to, but it's no longer on main. So we can click this link, and we're back on GitHub, and we're looking at specifically the repository as for this specific branch. And now, most of the times, if you sort of have recently committed, GitHub will be really nice and will say, hey, we noticed you just made a branch. Do you want to make a pull request out of this? And a pull request is what we want to do. Essentially, a pull request will make it such that other people can see what you've changed. They'll be able to look over it and also pull it, and they'll also sort of test it in their playgrounds and see if they actually like the changes. And so you can, let's go ahead and click compare and pull request. We didn't do too much, but normally if you want to leave a much longer comment, say if you had a lot of specific feedback from users and you wanted to detail what exactly that feedback was and why you made the changes, you might type it all here, but we don't really have a lot to type, so you can just leave it blank in this case. We'll say create pull request. And now we have sort of this pull request scene. So it has all of the information that we want to change. And if we go to files changed, other people can see what about the package we changed. So specifically, you can see that we changed the logo from the internal image to our Genovia crest, and we can see that you've changed preview to look over. Sort of red lines are lines that we're removing, green lines are lines that we're adding back in. And if we're not changing the entire line, usually it will just be highlighted with sort of a little bit darker green or a little bit darker red of what's the actual change being made in that line. Yeah, sorry, that would be my dog. Yeah, and so at this point, you'll sort of have your pull request. And this link, you can take this link, you can copy it, send it to other people on your team. They can visit with their GitHub accounts. They can sort of visit here, and they can sort of look over the changes. If they like the changes, they can sort of click review changes, and then I can't approve it because I'm the author of the pull request. But if someone else were to visit this, they could approve it and sort of just asynchronously, without having to sort of get in a full meeting. They could all look at it and see, sort of indicate their approval. And then when you are ready, you can click this big green button at the bottom that says merge pull request, which will then sort of essentially takes the changes that are in this branch and it puts it back onto main, main is just sort of the main branch. It's the sort of, I guess, canonical version that, like, whenever you're talking about this interview, or like usually it's the one being used by clients on the real website, and other branches are sort of branches that you might be changing or editing in the middle. So yeah, so that was the process of making a pull request, looking through it, and then merging it back into main, which you'll be doing a lot if you're making changes and you want to help make sure other people have the chance to look at them before.
Bryce, do you want to explain just like a little bit, like how do you decide what's the difference between a branch and a commit, and how do you decide when to make a new branch and when it's ready to merge?
Those are all very good questions, and they'll sort of at the end of the day, it sort of does just, it's up to you and your organization to sort of see what works the best. But I generally like to think of commits as very individual specific changes. So let's say in this very small repo that we have, we wanted to do a full plain language review. And usually when you're going through, and actually I think, let's see how fast I can pull up the Trello. We actually have a checklist for plain language review in there. So let's go to the bootcamp board on Trello. Cool. I'm just going to look at sorry, Steve, I'm touching your card again, but I'm just going to look at the checklist for plain language, which I believe is just 2.9. Yes. and most of these changes might not be actually applicable because this is a very small repo. But let's say we're doing a plain language review and we wanted to make sure that our interview is following all of these different guidelines. What I would suggest doing is sort of going through each of these guidelines, say, use sentence case and not title case for page headings. So your child's information instead of capital U, capital Y, your capital C child, capital I information. So on this page, I don't think we have, yeah, so actually we do have this issue. So we are saying file legal forms online. To be a little bit more follow plain language, we would change that to those last 3 words to be not capital. And again, this is sort of only one question, and so we wouldn't be able to do that. But that's sort of like like the smallest possible change that we could make that is bringing us in line with the form, with plain language. And so at this point, ideally you would save. We'll go to your packages, and let's say we're gonna make one more branch. This one's just gonna be plain language. And in this, we'd say changed title case or to sentence case. Let's commit. And then that'll commit. And so, but we haven't finished the full plain language review. We've just sort of done one part of that plain language review. So if we go back, there are still a lot of other things that we could change, including active voice instead of passive voice, or instead of a dash, and or avoiding and sort of a lot of other small things. And so we can go back, and I don't know if there's going to be anything that we can actually change really quickly. I don't know if anyone else has found one, but essentially the idea is that if we do find something that we can change really quickly or change from the plain language review, but it's sort of like a different idea, then we would go through and we would make a separate commit for that. So let's say, like a simple thing. So let's say instead of green words, we decide that they're not really green and they're more lime. This is not plain language at all, and green would be the proper way of doing this. So I sort of am conflating the uses of it here. But let's say we'd go through and say lime, and if we're using that term in a lot of other places, we would go through and change it there as well. But in that case, we sort of go through, go back, save again, and then make another commit. In this case, sort of a different, it's still a plain language change, but where it's sort of different. But it's like sort of a subcommit under plain language. And so yeah, and so at this point we follow the same process as we did before. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But the idea is you can make multiple commits that sort of shouldn't be any smaller. Like there's no reason you would want to make a commit for every single individual like change that you made to the interview. But if all of those changes have some relation together, like they're all changing title case to sentence case in a lot of places, or they're all getting rid of and ors or slashes in sentences, those should be commits. And then branches would just be something that someone can easily look over and say, all of these changes are also related. This is what we want to change the interview as like a cohesive whole. And so, yeah, those are sort of, I guess, like some good guidelines. But again, at the end of the day, it does sort of depend on what works best for you and your organization. But it might make sense to have like fewer, like much smaller pull requests for your organization, or it might make a lot of sense to have like larger pull requests where you're changing a lot of things in the interview. But it is sort of a balance between what you can understand individually being changed and sort of how many individual commits and pull requests and reviews you need to go through. Yeah. So
I just wanted to highlight. Oh, well, one more thing I think maybe we could highlight is like, so what we kind of discovered over time is like the more folks we had working together at once on things, the more of the features of GitHub we used. You can start small with just using it as a place to save your code that's not docassemble is in itself huge. The more you start to figure out like, oh, I need to be able to roll changes back, the more you'll think about each commit as like each commit should be its own idea. But if at first you just use it as like a save button every once in a while, that's still better than not using it. And you'll figure out those things over time. So you don't have to like drink from the fire hose completely right now. You can kind of experiment with the smallest amount of use it has for you to start and grow from there as your needs make it clear what you need. One thing that we did that might be worth showing is like if we just go right to the GitHub page, let's say you have someone who you want to be able to make changes to just language, that will probably come up a lot.
Cool, yes,
so yeah, this is perfect. And let's go to one of those pages and we'll go to that YAML file. You can edit text right here in GitHub by clicking that little pencil icon. And that can be anybody who has a GitHub account. They don't have to have access to your DocAssemble server. They could go in and make some changes, and those will come into you as a pull request if they kind of just follow through the default workflow of clicking save at the bottom, and it'll ask if you want to make a pull request, and it will allow them to give some description. That won't make the change live on your server. It'll just make it on GitHub that you can review and accept if you like it, and then pull back into your playground. So this is like a nice way to allow a subject matter expert who you've given a little bit of a training on how to use this, and to suggest changes and you can refine them and approve them and make them right. So that's just one more way that GitHub can be helpful for you.
And it's probably also worth noting at this point that you can, as we did includes before, you could break parts of larger interviews out into different YAML files, so that when you were giving it to a subject matter expert to review, you could just point them at the one YAML file with the specific stuff on it. And they could just do this without having to go through the rigmarole of like getting into the DocAssemble server or getting onto your Trello or wherever you're going to be doing stuff.
That's a good point. Yeah. So like if you're worried about them seeing a bunch of code that's confusing to them, you can make it so the file that they're including is just the question that you think you want them to edit. Or at least maybe it's only the text and not any of the other code that goes along with the questions. And I know, I've worked on projects with a lot of developers and hot butts, and you have to do this kind of thing where you pass the baton, right? Only one person can be editing at a time. Using GitHub frees you from that. Two people can be editing the same document at the same time. It doesn't work for templates so well, but it works well for the interview code. And then GitHub will handle helping you merge those changes. We don't really have a good demo of that right now, but that's something else. It's one of the things you can do. In addition to working on like, hey, I'm changing one feature at once, it's not ready yet, but I can still change the main one. You kind of got that idea with how branches work. Two people can be working on different branches at once, and then you can merge them together.
And then in the rare event where you both edited the same line, then there'll be a merge conflict and you'll have to resolve that. But for anything where you're not working the same line, it'll take care of that pretty seamlessly.
And a merge conflict, as much of a pain as it can be, is a lot better than not knowing that two people change the same thing and you don't get to see that you did some hard work and another person undid it all when you try to merge it. So that's always probably a good place for us to switch gears. I know that we covered a lot, but also a little of GitHub. But I think it is enough for you to do what you need in the beginning. And our thought here was, before we do breakout rooms, to make sure people can see some of the solutions demoed, if you want to just write down something you tried to do in DocAssemble in the last week or 2 weeks on the teams, just I can make a thread for it, or you can put it right in the bootcamp channel. I think the bootcamp channel is fine. Everyone will be able to see it more easily. So like an example for me that I did last week was wanting to show or hide a field on the screen based on a checkbox. So that's the idea, like a goal you tried to reach. Doesn't have to be specific code, just something you wanted to know how to do in DocAssemble, something small like that. And maybe we'll take a minute to try to address some of those in the big group before we go into breakouts. The teams to see what people post as questions. We'll do that one I just said, if no one has any other questions like that they want to share on the group. And I am seeing some some points here, mostly just about questions people had from what we've just covered. If you don't want to use the teams, we're a good sized group. If anyone wants to unmute and talk about something that if that's a faster way for people to share.
Help us help you.
Quiet group today.
Michael had provided some links to further GitHub documentation. But yeah, you can find that. There's stuff on the linked from our documentation, and the GitHub has its own as well.
Yeah, that was some of our Michelle and one of our students from last semester did a really nice job running that, I think. So I think that's a really good help. Okay, well, no questions, nothing that people try to do. That's okay. This isn't like I might give my students a hard time if they hadn't done their homework, but it's not like that. Okay.
And it's not like you didn't do your homework either. Not having questions doesn't mean.
No, that's right. You're right. That's a better way to say it. All right. So Jack is saying he's having a problem with the.
Yeah, there's actually the issue that I was running into at the end. I wasn't sure if it was me. Which might be something that's going wrong with our server.
I don't know. Did we maybe uninstalled maybe the package somehow?
Or did
I think it might not be me.
did we inadvertently edit that package and break it, or?
That wouldn't be possible, but I do see it's not installed. I think maybe when I was sneakily installing. Oh, someone installed it from their playground. That is what happened. Probably completely unintentionally.
So there's a little button at the bottom.
It was not somebody on this team, probably.
Yeah. But so you know, there's a little button at the bottom of that GitHub page. That's a little checkbox that says install on the server. Don't do that. Don't hit that button.
I'm going to install the latest version of it from GitHub.
And what that basically does is that makes your package available to everyone because it installs it on the server. But correct me if I'm wrong, does that overwrite or does it just conflict?
It will overwrite the one. I mean, it's on GitHub, which is one other reason to do GitHub. If you just do everything on the server, you can break stuff without having a way to undo it. So I'm gonna, it makes it so that the version that is shared by everybody on the server is the one that you install. If no one is using your package, that does not matter at all. It only matters if they are referencing it. And the assembly line package is the big one that has all the shared code. And so that, I don't know how it got installed, but someone installed it accidentally, and we're going to just update it so it has the latest code from GitHub. Okay, well, while that is happening, I put a package inside the files folder, which we can just experiment with that one little thing I mentioned, which was just using logic to show or hide fields on the screen. And let me share that now so that you can find it easily. Still getting used to Teams. Okay, so the file that I put in a little earlier today was this MA military affidavit for default judgment. So that's the one we're going to use. I'm sharing it now on Teams so you can see it there. It's a zip file. We'll upload it as a zip file again. Or actually, well, maybe I should have put it on GitHub so you could practice that again, but we're not. All right, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to go here to my bootcamp project inside my playground. I have the military affidavit pulled in already, but I'm going to go to, if you haven't yet, I'm going to go to packages. I'm going to upload a package, and it's going to be this zip file here that is on the Teams channel that I just shared. And we're just going to run it and take a look and notice something that we can improve on it. This is like another really common skill that you're going to have in DocAssemble that we don't have done in the Weaver, but you're probably going to want to make your screens a little bit more dynamic and interactive sometimes. Okay. So I'm going to skip through some of these placeholder questions here. And here's the main meat of this form. And I will pull up the form so you can see what that looks like. And what is this asking about? What is it all about? Okay. So you can see the way that this form is laid out. We have a checkbox that says there are people who are in military service right now. This is the Uniform Service Members Civil Relief Act, which is a federal law here in the United States. You probably have had to fill out a form like this in civil court or have one like this in your state that doesn't say Trial Court of Massachusetts. You just have to list people who are in the military here if you've checked that box, people who are definitely not in the military here, and people that you aren't sure about here. So if we go back to our running form, let's say there's nobody in the bottom two categories and I click next. It's not really the best user experience here, right? I don't want to have to answer any information if there's nobody who falls in one of those categories. So I want to, when I check this box, I want this area field where I can type names, but otherwise I don't want to have to interact with that area box at all. So we're going to do that, make that change by going back to our playground. And I want to find this question in my playground. Can anyone remember like a good way for me to quickly find that question inside the bigger YAML file? We're a small enough group, we can start to
The
do a little bit
hamburger
more.
do it, I think.
You
Say it
copy
again,
that.
Oh, or Arena, yeah, either one.
Oh, you go first, Jack. Sorry.
Go ahead, Rena. I think Jack muted.
Oh, I was just saying you can copy the ID on the top.
Copy the ID, yes. So what am I going to do with that ID after I copy it?
You can.
I can search for it. Yeah. So if I go back to, if I've looked at my running interview and I copy that code from the ID field here that's shown on the screen, I put that in the search bar and it will take me right to that question. So that's a good way to be able to navigate through your YAML file. All right. So I think that there's a chance that people might have gotten a little bit hung up on just getting to the chance to save this package into their playground. So let me just do one thing. Let's put just this little snippet of code on the Teams channel. So in case you got stuck there, you can still follow along. Okay. Oh, and I see Michael just said that he got a bad zip file error. So there are different kinds of problems people might be having. Let's try running just this question, because that's the thing we're worrying about right now. So I'm going to give it a mandatory true so that it actually can run. You're not seeing what I'm doing, so I'm just narrating. All right. And so you'll have this question to be able to customize on your screen if you copy the code I just put on Teams, if you had some problems uploading the package. All right. So we are going to make this dynamic by showing this text area only if this checkbox has been checked. So I go back to my playground. The field I'm going to change is the one that says list all parties serving in the military. That's going to only show if this field above here is true. It's been checked. So I'm going to go to, if you're in the same file that I am, you'll go to line 157 and hit enter. You'll get an indentation at the right place. And I'm going to make a modifier just like these ones, the input area, max length. This is going to be called show if word show, a space, and then the word if in the space, or rather no space the second time. So show if, and put a colon, just like these other modifiers. And I'm going to put the variable that this is contingent on after that word. So I can go ahead and copy that from here and paste it right here. So what we're doing here, we're saying this field, it all falls indent from this hyphen. This field will only show if that checkbox has been checked. So let me click save, the blue save button. I'm going to refresh this and let's see if that change took. All right, we only see 2 area fields now. And if I check this box, it'll dynamically show and hide that area box that's there on the screen. And I'm going to put something here, just nonsense, but if I click next, it'll allow me to go now, right? It's not making me fill in that hidden field on the screen. So that is something you're going to be fairly likely to do when you have optional information. Like it might be easier for the person to actually click something to say that they don't have any information to put there, rather than just noticing there's no asterisk next to the field. That's something to consider as a pattern for making your interview a little bit more easy to interact with and more explicit, so people help your user put the right information in. All right, so that we did the first field. Where will I go next to change the next text area input? Can anyone tell me? No, people are going off camera to avoid answering. All right, so we can make that same change really quickly here, right? So if we, the nice thing about this is all text, so you can copy and paste. We don't have to go into some different dialogues to do it. So we're gonna go to the next area field. Let's kind of copy and paste that. And we're gonna change these variables. So we had has serving parties. That was the first checkbox. The second checkbox is has not serving parties. We're going to make those match. The last checkbox here is has unknown serving parties. I'm going to paste that there. Save it. Refresh. And you'll see now we have all 3 of those area fields are dynamically shown when I check the box or don't check the box. So that's something I think that's fairly common for people to run into as something you're going to do in DocAssemble. Let's see here. And if people ran into something like that they wanted to know how to do, we could talk about that now as well. If nobody has a, oh, Jack, you unmuted.
Yes. Could you, so my eyes are horrible. Could you pop the code that you used to set those in
Absolutely.
the chat somewhere? Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll put that right back on the Teams. I'll put that in the thread.
Thanks so much.
And so for those watching the video, that's the thread on Thursday, March 4th, 2021.
And the one you'll have to make that mandatory, but if you're working just from that little code snippet, but if you are working from the full file, then you'll see the whole thing. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
I have a question.
Go ahead, Christian.
Okay, so it's a kind of a version of this example.
Mm-hmm.
So let's imagine that one of the fields, like it's not like an yes, no, it's multiple choices. Like it's a multiple checkboxes, it's not just one. And one of them is other. And I want to control a field that appears when a user selects other.
Great.
How can I do
question.
that?
You can, yeah. Let's I'll make a new file and I'm just going to type quickly and we'll do it together. And I'll save it onto the Teams. We can see it. So let's make a new file called test checkboxes. I'm just going to make a mandatory question. All that we're going to do is just to see this little thing here. And I know this is going to be hard for everyone else to follow along on. So I'll put it on the Teams in short order. Make this data type checkboxes. And we'll put some choices there. Let's get everybody that code. And I'm just going to save and run and make sure I didn't put any typos in there that I didn't catch. Okay. I don't think I did, but while it's saving and running. Okay. Yeah, it was some weird timing issue on the playground. Let's try that again. Okay. And actually, let me add our other field. But you were specifically talking about other, so let's just use other. So I'm going to put this on Teams. I gotta move stuff around. Let's see. And Christian, your question, if I understand it right, was you only want this other input to show when someone's checked that box other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another really common thing you're going to do. Okay, so one thing, I like to put a little short version of each of these variables if I use checkboxes. And why might I do that? Well, let's say my subject matter expert comes along and wants to reword choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. Maybe they decide stylistically they don't like to have a capital O, they like to have a lowercase o. I don't have to worry about that if I've used a short version and a long version of the description. It's going to be like some invariant here. It's still going to be text, but it's going to be, it won't have to change if the version on the left changes. So if you've used hot docs, that's going to be pretty familiar. In a multiple choice option, you have the value and you have, I forget the right name. Brett, what's the name for the second column? Brett's still on the call. He'll remember right away. Or anyone else who used hot docs. Or maybe it's okay though, either way. So the idea here is something that doesn't change often, and here's something that does. On the right is something that never changes or doesn't need to change. I'm going to still use that same keyword, show if, but I can't just use my checkboxes, right? Like that won't be right. We know that. Let's see what that actually, I think will probably not cause an error, but it won't do what we want. Which makes sense because we haven't even said the word other yet, have we, right? And we're not going to just use the word other either, because that doesn't tell us what variable it is, right? Other like that. DocAssemble has no way to know what thing we're wanting to know about is other. I need to, this is a special form of it. We just say, we use the two sub keywords basically. So we keep show if exactly the same. We had to make a new line and we're going to do variable indented once, the colon, and that's going to be where my checkboxes goes. And then the word is on its own line, same indentation as variable, and it gets whatever that choice is here. Now when I click other, let's see. What did I do wrong here? I might not like it if they don't have it in quotes, but I don't think that's the problem. So, okay, right. These are checkboxes. Let me change this so the example works. If we get rid of data type checkboxes, my example's right. It's actually good because this is the other thing I was thinking I should show both of these to you. Okay. All right, so that was what we were just testing there. I'm going to put this on the teams in the same thread so you can see it there. Even though it's called checkboxes, it's not. It's a drop-down menu this time.
Okay, so it doesn't work with actual checkboxes, but it works with the drop-down.
This example works with a drop-down, but not with checkboxes. So I'm going to just make another copy of that and make it up front so you can see how to do it with checkboxes, because you might want to have both examples in your code at some point.
Yeah, okay, sure.
All right, so let's keep it as checkboxes. All right, so what are checkboxes? Checkboxes are, in DocAssemble's language, they are a dictionary. And for those of you who have come from other languages, it's a repeated value, right? They work a little bit differently. In HotDocs, checkboxes, multiple choice, they're all just called multiple choice, and there's like a little toggle to switch between the two. But in DocAssemble, they're really, and internally in HotDocs, they're really different values. But in DocAssemble, you're confronted with that a little bit more. So to get the value of a checkbox, you would use this, this bracket syntax to access the value. So, and that value is going to be either true or false, depending on which item they checked. But it could be true or false for multiple items. So that's why you have that bracket to say which item you're accessing from the list, which option you're accessing from the list. So I'm going to do my checkboxes, and then inside quotes, the word other. That's going to be referring to this line 12 here.
Interesting.
And it's going to be either true or false. So I can use it directly with that show if language here. So this is something that there are probably some more ways we could experiment and to show like how do you use the different values. But let's see here.
So you basically treat that specific option as a single checkbox.
Yes, exactly.
You're targeting a single checkbox value in a list of checkboxes or something like that.
Right. And like, why might it be helpful to have them grouped together like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably think of some reasons, right? So let's say you want to check the value of each checkbox in turn. If you had to write down the full list of variable names, it's a lot harder than just writing down, I want to work through all of the checkbox items and see which ones they checked or didn't check. Grouping them just can be more semantically helpful, and also can make your code easier to read and shorter.
Interesting.
Quentin, I think that showing how the variable is stored for that one can often be helpful, because I know that really was what made understanding it for me easier.
And are you thinking just with the source button, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great idea. So actually, we haven't really showed this off either. So if you're trying to figure out like experimenting with something on screen and you're like, well, what, it won't be as helpful because we have to go to a new screen to see the value. But
well, if you click continue, you'll get the drop-down list, right?
Question. You're right. Yeah, so let's do that. So I'm going to check other and choice 3, and then I'm going to type something here. And I click source on the second screen. So this should be the same code that you all have in the Teams window if you're following along that way. I can click source, and I get this option here called show variables and values, where I can just kind of inspect what does DocAssemble think the variable state is right now at this moment in time before I reach this screen. I like to use Firefox for this because it gives us this nice little collapsible list of fields. If you're using a different browser like Chrome, you'll just see it, the data in this format here, which is called JSON format. I like Firefox for partly for that reason. If you don't have that handy, you can go to this website, jasoneditoronline.org, and copy in that raw data and paste it. And then you can switch back and forth between the tree view and the code view. So you can see here, my checkboxes is something called a DA dict. It's basically a custom version of a dictionary in Python. And then underneath it, there are elements, and each of those elements is either true or false.
I think I get it now. I understand how it works.
And on this dropdown, the value is going to just be text. That's why we're checking the variable value. My checkbox is either other. It's not going to be a list of options as far as docassemble is considered. The dropdown, it's only going to be one choice, which is going to be stored as text, just the same as if you had a text box on the screen.
Okay. If you have multiple checkboxes, you can treat it like a checkbox. So it's basically true or false. But if you have a drop-down list, the result, the answer is a text, basically, and you can check it as text.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I could tell you, like, that is something that is so easy to get mixed up. I mean, I got it mixed up the first time I tried something that was wrong. And understanding that will help you when you work with those two different kinds of values. But even just hearing it, I think, will help people remember it, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a very good example and explanation. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Other questions that people have? And I think it's still worth doing a little bit of breakout rooms. What do you think? David's nodding.
Quentin, do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Back on the military affidavit options, how do we make it so each of those checkbox fields, or the one of those, is mandatory? You have to pick, or maybe there's a I don't know, or there's some other option that would go with the form, but just some way that, so if the form requires a response, you have to pick one of those three.
Well, Matt, that's you've gone right to the more complicated questions, but I think that is a good one. And maybe even just having it here on the recording to look at later will help people, even if they're not ready to implement it on their own. So yeah, let's try that. Let's go back to, and just to make everybody working on the same page here, I'm going to switch to the code I put in the channel, which is just that question without anything else. So give me a minute to pull that code into my playground here. Yeah, so one thing we could do is experiment with different types of inputs. So we have it as a yes, no checkbox right now. We could make those yes, no radio buttons instead. That would force people to actually at least read each of those and decide yes or no for each one, right? That might help people use the form correctly. Let me make that mandatory. So that does help, I think, with reducing errors. Mm-hmm. Let's say you absolutely do not want to let them say no to everything here. We are going to use something called validation code. It's the same as like setting error text in HotDocs. It's like a little bit more advanced feature, just like setting error text, a little bit more advanced feature in HotDocs. So I'm going to go to the beginning of a new line here. It actually does not matter what order it is in, but I can't mix it in the middle of the fields. It has to go on its own section of my question block. Type the words validation code. And thinking about Jack here, I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger for everybody.
Thank you.
Type a colon, and then a vertical pipe, because this is a code block, like we worked with in other occasions. It's going to be indented, and it can have multiple lines of code. So I'm going to check the value of each of these checkboxes and make sure at least one of them has been checked. So first, let me get those all on a line here. And I want to do something if all of them are false.
You mean
Yeah.
the has unknown serving parties, not the not serving parties, right?
Yes. Thank you. And what happened there was I had copied the text area instead of the checkbox. Thank you for catching that, Phil. Yeah. So I could copy that from here and put that right there. And okay, so I'm gonna do something if it's gonna be any of them. Right, so I'm gonna put the word or in between each of those. I want to group those together because it's a whole group of them that I'm trying to test the value of. I use parentheses, just order of operations here. And I want to, does this look right to folks? Do I want to do something when one of those is true? Or when none of them are true? So I'm going to use the word not to like invert the value there. So if not has serving parties or has not serving parties or has unknown serving parties. So that's my if statement here. And let me put that and the validation code just in case people had some typos. Get us to that point here on Teams. Word if means we're going to check something. The colon at the end of the line, that's something that you need in Python. And that next line is going to be indented. And we're introducing a new function here. And I actually kept trying to remember, I think it should be on this list here. So we can scroll down from this list if you want to make sure you get the syntax right. This is a good place to check. So there is a function called validation error. If I click the little I, it'll explain what it is, and I can get linked to the documentation. And this helps me remember if I wasn't sure if there was a capital E and no underscore, scrolling down to find it can help you avoid problems with remembering the right syntax. So we see here it says it has two parameters, a message and field, which looks like it's optional. Which if you know Python, that makes sense. If you don't, then that's fine. You don't have to worry about that part. We're not going to use the optional value here. So validation error, and we just put in our message. So that's just whatever we want to show on screen when someone hasn't answered one of those questions. And you need to select at least one choice. We could put a much better error message than that, but let's start with just that. So this is what you should have on your screen now. Underneath the code that I just added, I indented once more. So it's 4 spaces and it says validation underscore error, a parenthesis, a quote, and then whatever phrase we wanted to show on screen, ending quote and ending parenthesis. So let's save and run that again. Now, if I try to continue without selecting at least one, I get a little error message that pops up. It's called a toast, that little message, because it pops up like toast. Let me put that full code on the screen on your Teams channel. So Matt, was that a good answer to your question? Did that?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And maybe this is separate. Is there a way if you wanted to show it on the screen instead of as a toast message?
That's a great follow-up question. Yes, there is a way. So that is what that little field optional parameter does. So we kind of glossed over that. And field, I'm gonna put a comma, just like in that model here. I put the word field, and I'm going to set that to the name of the field that I want it to show underneath. So let's say probably it makes sense to show that underneath the unknown option here if they haven't chosen anything. So let's put that in that as the option here. So I'm going to have has unknown parties, serving parties. It's going to be inside quotes with the keyword field. So how did I change this? I just put a comma, and then I put the word field, and then a single equal sign. And then I put the name of the variable inside quotes. So now if I save it and I refresh, usability wise, I like this a lot better too. So that's a good call to bring up that idea, Matt. So now it will show underneath whatever field I mentioned. If it made more sense to have that be a field higher up on the screen, I could have made that change by changing the field. Oops, I copied instead of pasted. Notice I don't want to use one of the text area fields, right? Because that won't do anything if that field is hidden. I want to use one of the checkboxes that's always visible on the screen. If I didn't want it to be attached to any field, the UI there is a little bit more complicated. You'll have to think about like where you can't show validation error without having it attached to a field or as a toast. Those are the two choices.
Oh, that is great. So helpful. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. I suspect since people didn't post a lot of ideas in the channel and people did not post a lot of ideas in this group until we started experimenting with some code, the breakout rooms might not be that high value. So I'm going to encourage people to ask another, we have another 25 minutes. Let's keep going with this. Your questions and small things you wanted to know how to do. Or big things, if we can talk about it at a level that makes sense in 25 minutes.
You can even extrapolate out to bigger things if you.
Hi, I'm Bella. I would have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah, you're a little quiet.
Somehow related to what Christian asked before.
Okay.
How that the same thing would work with radio buttons? How can we refer to other in that case?
Great question. Yeah, so let's go back to that.
And could you repeat that for folks who maybe had a hard time hearing that one?
Yeah. So the question was, if we wanted to do the same thing we did with checkboxes, but with radio buttons instead, how would we do that? So that's a good question. So let's modify this a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm just going to copy this and make it higher up on the list. And I'm going to change it from data type checkboxes to data type radio. And you'll see now we have radio buttons, even though they're still labeled as checkboxes. Let me fix that. I won't change the variable name, but I could. All right, so now we have those radio buttons. And yeah, I didn't change anything about the show if logic. So as you expect, that doesn't do anything. Anyone know like the value of what a radio button outputs is? Anyone have a guess?
It could be text, I think.
Text. So we had two
Text,
guesses,
yeah.
text and true false. Yeah, so we kind of tried with having it be true false. So Christian's guess is text. Let's try that. So then we're going to use the same syntax we used for a dropdown menu, right? So we do show if on a new line, we do variable, my checkboxes, and we're going to check it with the word is and whatever value we're testing against. All right, so now I saved that, I'm gonna refresh, and now that other option pops up. So we see we have a bunch of different options that end up still putting out the same kind of value inside DocAssemble, right? So we saw the radio buttons, the drop-down menus, they're all just creating text. The one that is kind of special that's a built-in input that we've used so far is the checkboxes, which create something called a dictionary. If you haven't done any computer programming, or even if you just haven't used Python, you might not have run into that data structure, but we've seen some ways to interact to use it. And those hopefully will help you with enough information just to try it out and to experiment with it and to see some working code and change it. You'll be able to get what you need out of that. All right, let me put this on the Teams channel so everyone can see that. And I'll try to put it on this in the right comment thread so it's more helpful for people. There aren't a lot more different types of data that you create inside a DocAssemble question. We saw a couple of them turn into text. Like another example would be, and let's use another place to get some of these examples. So it doesn't require anybody looking even at the Teams channel. If I scroll down here to these example blocks, I think I showed this off last week, but let's look at it again. If we went to fields, email address, this is a really good example of a question that I'm going to show you how to use this again, in case you didn't remember. So I'm going to start where I want this to get inserted. I'm going to put it at the top so it runs if I make it mandatory. Scroll down, click the green insert button once I've chosen the example block I want to work with. I need to make it mandatory with the way that this interview is set up right now. This is another field where it actually doesn't just work like a regular text field on screen, because it's validating it for me automatically, right? It says you need to enter a complete email address. But in the back end on DocAssemble side, it's just stored as text. You can think of this a little bit as like in Hot Docs, you can use different patterns for how you want people to enter data, and it's kind of doing something similar. Except it's just validating it. It's not helping people enter it in a particular constricted way. It's just making sure they can't go to the next screen until they've entered it the right restricted way. There are other data types as well. There's things that are numbers, there are things that are dates. Those are actually different values on the back end. But a lot of things that look different end up being just text in the end.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there a way to define what that validation looks like, or is that in like Python? Where if I'm like setting up a new Python class, if I wanted to say like, this is going to be a, say, social security number that has to have hyphens after the first 3 digits or something like that?
Really good question. So that is one of the nice things about DocAssemble's extensibility. Social security numbers are a good one. I wrote like a little module for that. When you add something completely new, there's no built-in way to easily customize what happens on the screen, the interactive things in that input box. You need to build a module to do that, but you can. That's an option that you have. Let's say I just wanted to change this and do a custom error message. So I'm going to keep that as email. And I want to do something if, let me see. I don't want to get too complicated with the kind of validation you need to do. So let's see. Well, okay, let's. The simpler options, if we go to the documentation, this is a great place to look at. So this is not actually, we're not going to look at email, but it's going to be on the same page here. I'm going to scroll up here and go to validation. This goes into a lot of explanation about the ways you can do different kinds of things. So things like numbers can have a minimum and a maximum. You can have a minimum and a maximum length. Those are really easy to get built in. And this is kind of nice. Like, let's say you want a dynamic minimum or maximum. So here, that's pulling in and referencing the value of another variable with Mako, with that $ curly bracket syntax that we experimented with earlier. And here is what we're talking about. We're talking about validating with Python code, essentially, right? So here is where inside, this is a very simple Python function that returns true or false based on something about that, what's shown on screen. There's lots of places that you can define a Python function. We could have defined a Python function inside another little code block. We can do a little inline function, which is called a lambda function. Or we could use one that's built in to Python or docassemble that has true false as what it returns. So that does start to get a little bit more complicated. Here is an example that you can play with in your code and customized on that documentation page. Something that we need to do on our 209A, so we added to the documentation as an example. 209A being our domestic violence protection form. So you can see a more complicated example that you can still do inline if it's a relatively simple check you want to do, but it's something that's not built in. You don't want to write a function for it and put it in a module file. The main thing here that you get from seeing this is
that needs another validate line.
What is it?
That needs a second validate line underneath the height line, after line 10
right.
before line 11.
Yep. You're just eagle-eyed today, Michael. Thank you. And that's wrong in the documentation, so we should fix it there. All right. I'm gonna make that mandatory. So this is we're going into some really advanced stuff, folks. So like this, but maybe it's kind of nice to see, hey, I can do this. And I'm going to put that on Teams because you might not have all gotten it from the documentation page, and the documentation page has an error. So 2 reasons. Okay, let's look at this, see what it does, and then let's look at it and see what happens. All right, so when I run this code, it asks me for me to tell my weight and my height. So let's just try putting in some numbers. And it gives me an error message. And it tells me what's wrong here. It's saying, please include a unit. That disappeared kind of quickly. And so what's going on in the back end is it's looking at the text that I put in. This is just a text field as far as docassemble is concerned. But I put on my own custom validation that says, that's checking for something. There's some of this might make sense, some of it might not. But what we're basically doing is we're looking to see, is that number numeric? Is the text that they gave to us all numeric, or is there something else in there that's not looking like it's numeric? If I put in just pounds, it doesn't do any kind of error. It's only when I only numbers. So you can see here, if you just follow this model, if you only wanted to check if something's numeric, that will be really easy for you to do. We can change the validation message. That part will probably is easy to see just from the model. If you wanted to invert it, you probably can figure out that you just want to flip that value here from true to false. And the meat of what you're doing is obviously right here, right? Y dot is numeric. So you have to use some Python knowledge to figure out what you want to do. Let's simplify this to something that's asking for a number. Well, actually, let's keep it with text. Sorry. Let's do something like change that. I think word might be a reserved keyword. So y is the placeholder for whatever this variable is in this lambda expression. So y dot ends with is another thing you can do to a string in Python. And there's a lot of like little simple Python things you can check in that same kind of way. And it's the same validation message, doesn't make any sense, but okay, so that may or may not be helpful until you have a really specific thing, and you can always ask for help to figure out what it is you need to do there. Definitely, it's using some much more advanced features of Python and of DocAssemble. And I know we've lost some folks there because they've literally signed off the Zoom, but maybe that will be helpful for you later when you're looking at this video. We have 10 minutes. We've already lost the people who weren't interested in that question, I suspect. So if people wanted to dig into it a little bit more, we could.
I submitted a pull request for the error in the documentation.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Jonathan. We'll review it. But yeah, good call. So you're noticing, like, probably, right? Like, so when we're working in DocAssemble, we're using more than one language. So all of that stuff that I just did there with the lambda expression, that's pure Python. And it is not something that it's definitely a more advanced feature. But the nice thing is, let's say somebody needed to do that one time and you wanted to make use of their work. And they wrote a little function called, let's do this in a little code block here, just to show how you would do it that way, which is probably easier for a lot of people to follow. Pretend that this code block I'm writing right now came from someone else's code, a module that they put together.
So I don't know if this is anticipating or responding to Brett's question, but he was asking about regular expressions and
okay. Well, you could totally have used a regular expression rather than just using the little string that ends with. But yes, Brett, you could use regular expressions inside whatever validation function you do. And I definitely will not get into how to do regular expressions here.
That's okay. Brett says he's good. He just wanted to know if it was possible.
Anything you can do in Python could go into this function. That's the key thing to know. Lambda expressions are a way to do something on a short line that is not easy to read at all, but it is quick and convenient if you know what they are. Functions are a little bit, they're a little bit easier on the readability scale. Still something that's more advanced that you won't need to do very much in your code, but they're an option. Basically, a function is like a hot docs computation that accepts parameters. So I have to think about how to rewrite this. I guess here, if word dot ends with else, we raise our validation error here. So that's the basically, we crammed all that syntax. That's these 5 lines into this 1-line lambda expression, but it's obviously way more readable if we make it a function. We could just refer to that function here. So someone else did that hard work for you. Your validation code looks way simpler that you have to interact with. And probably it's more readable if you use that also.
So I noticed that that just seems to take as the input whatever that variable value was. What if you needed to pass additional parameters?
Well, in terms of inline validation for one field, you are out of luck, but that's where you could use the validation code, which can do something with more than one of the variables on the screen. Very good question, David. So if you remember, if people aren't quite sure what David was talking about here, if we went to our military affidavit form and looked at that, remember there we were checking, like, did they answer one of the 3 different checkboxes on the screen? That's why we used validation code there. You could do the same thing in validation code, but by if you want it to always appear on one field, that's a little bit more clear if you put it right there in line with the field that you're trying to change. Hopefully that's more readable for folks too. And I'll put that on the Teams. This is what happens when we go into the more advanced stuff. We don't have prepared questions for people. We're going to get to more tricky questions. So if people come with questions next week, actually next week, I think we're going to be spending a fair amount of time with the income class. So it might be not as much free form time, but.
Yeah, I have a very quick question, hopefully.
Okay.
We still have time. It's more about docx part. So it's like the Word template. I was wondering if we use like repeats, for example. So I want to repeat some paragraphs or some stuff. How do I handle punctuation? Is there an automatic way to put like a column and semicolon and stuff like that on a repeated paragraph?
Sure. Good question. So I think it depends on, are you talking about multiple things in a list? Or is it, well, list, maybe that's not even enough of a description. Do you mean like, would they all appear on one line or would each item get its own paragraph?
Each item gets its own paragraph, yes.
Okay. I believe that there is I have to remember where it is. I think it might be here under the documentation about docx files. There's a special parameter that's basically helps you figure out if it's the last item. Or maybe it was a function. I'll have to think about that question. That's a really good question that we might be able to find it together. So we could take a minute to look. I saw Rena, you were about to ask a question, maybe. I don't know if that freaks out my students sometimes if I'm looking at when they unmute. But.
Yeah, I unmuted for a second. It's a less advanced question. I haven't experimented too much with new forms yet. I think it would help just going through like how, like what you what your thinking is when you approach starting a new form, and I guess a quick recap of like how all of these pieces come together, just conceptually to get an understanding.
That's, and Christian, you know what I'll do is I'll put the answer that because it is there and I've seen it used. I'll put that on the Teams. And Rena, that's a great question. Where are some of the things that you're like unsure about when you're starting a project? So like walk me through that a little bit so I can answer the right part.
I think the first step would be like put it through the document like PDF tool, and then setting up the variables, and then making sure. I think the quick, efficient process is making sure that the variables are all set before you put it. Mm-hmm. But then I know I had to go back to it because there were some like variables that were processing through the Weaver, or I think I was using a different approach. It was after I learned about what would be the most efficient way. Mm-hmm. So I just haven't had a chance to start improving my workflow. But
yeah.
I don't know if there's. Yeah.
Well, I would say like, you know, the Weaver is like a great like accelerator, but you might take a couple tries before you figure out how to get your documents prepared for the Weaver, right? So it's pretty normal to like go back and rerun stuff probably when you're starting out. But what I do is I try to, and it helps to have automated a form all the way through more than once too, right? So to know what to label things, having labeled something before helps. But that is what I do. I try to add labels to everything, whether it's a Word document or a PDF. Then I run it through the Weaver, and then that's usually like a one-time thing to go through the Weaver. But you might end up having to do it a second time if you have a lot of things that you think I should have redone those. If it's just a small number of things, then I'll keep doing my editing in the Playground. I'll edit the template and upload the fixed template to my Playground. I won't go back to the Weaver to make any fixes. Okay. Only if it's a big change.
And at what point do you start like working on in GitHub?
GitHub I do right away because there's no harm in having a backup of my stuff in progress. Okay, so and that's a fine way to just think of it as a backup at the beginning of your work.
And the first step on GitHub is to pull the package. I need a refresher on all of this.
No problem. I mean, I think so what we showed today was we showed pulling in a package, making a change, and pushing to a new package, right? So, but if you're only working on your own code and you're not starting from someone else's, you would skip the pulling step. You would just create your package inside the Playground and push it up to GitHub. You would never have done a pull first.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and you know, I think those are really good questions. They're hard to answer in a short time, but they're great ones, and I think we could keep having conversations about that. But we're at 1 o'clock now, so it's probably the end of the day. Again, next week we'll be talking about the income class. We're going to go over a little bit of some of the ways to install packages. If people have their own servers prepared, we'll be happy to help you get that step done. Otherwise, we'll just simulate it on our servers. So we won't ask people to install packages on our server, but we'll just show how to go through the motions a little bit, so you'll see what to do. Might as well, David, you want to close us off?
Nope, can't think of anything more. We're just getting to the end. But remember, the end is just it's the end of the beginning, right? So the idea here is we're trying to on-ramp you to the community so that you can continue to ask questions and work through things. So do not feel like, oh my goodness, I don't know everything yet, because you'll never know everything. And this is just to sort of get you to be able to ask the questions you want to be able to ask.
And I want to really emphasize that the way we structure this bootcamp was we have, you know, easily like 40 hours of content that we are just trying to preview. We're going to be giving you the outline or the table of contents for you to come back and fill in more details later. And we just wanted to make sure to cover all the big high points through these 4 weeks.
Right. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, have a great week. We'll see you on Teams. See you here next week.